Welcome, fans, to a special edition of the Double D podcast. Damian Nelson and David Hero coming to you here on a Wednesday night where this podcast is going to be dropping. And obviously, huge news breaking last night in the wrestling world, that being the passing away of the Ultimate Warrior, a man who you just heard give what would end up being an amazingly telling speech, if you will, on Raw Monday night, just one day before he passed away. And listening to those words, listening to the things he said, absolutely surreal that it would be less than 24 hours later that the Ultimate Warrior would leave this earth, leave this world. Just absolutely amazing. And we're going to talk about those words. We're going to talk about the Ultimate Warrior in the weekend and this, I guess you can call it, story that has developed. But before we get to that, let's fill you in on where we are in this situation and what we know about this situation. The news broke last night, obviously, when Triple H sent out the initial tweet somewhere around the 11 o'clock Central Time hour announcing that the Ultimate Warrior had passed away. We would later find out from TMZ.com that it was approximately 5:50 p.m. yesterday in Arizona, Scottsdale, Arizona, where The Undertaker collapsed after clutching his chest while walking in a parking lot at a hotel. He was then treated on by the fire department, the paramedics, obviously in Scottsdale. They took him to a local hospital. And the Undertaker was pronounced dead shortly after. I'm sorry, the Ultimate Warrior was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at that hospital. This all happened over the course of a very short period of time on Tuesday evening in Scottsdale, Arizona. Now there is an autopsy scheduled for Thursday, but all roads really lead to, at this point, at least especially what the police department in Scottsdale said, this was a catastrophic medical event. Many are speculating that it was a massive heart attack, and really all the evidence does support that. And just amazing, David, when you look at the last 4 days. You go back to Saturday, the Hall of Fame induction for the Ultimate Warrior. We were there live in New Orleans. You go back to Sunday, WrestleMania 30, in front of 75,000 people. The Ultimate Warrior stands and bows as a Hall of Fame inductee. You go to Monday, where he gave that speech on Raw, his first time on Raw in over, I think it was 18 years or something of that sort. Just a surreal weekend. And when I first saw the news, when Triple H broke that story yesterday, my reaction was, what? And luckily that was the first tweet I saw about it. I'd actually received a text from you just a few minutes earlier that I did not get, but was sitting there as well, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, I didn't know the man. I never met the man in my life, but spending the last 3 days at events that honored his legacy made me feel at least that I was much closer to him than anyone else who has passed recently. And it was just amazing. And just, it's difficult to put into words because it was the most unexpected of wrestling deaths, I think, that have happened. And later on, we're going to talk about just the evolution from Saturday all the way through Tuesday, and how just surreal this whole situation is. But David, when you heard the news, how did you hear the news? What was your initial reaction, and what are your thoughts now on the death of the Ultimate Warrior?
Well, I was getting, my phone was blowing up on Twitter saying, "Hey, is it true? Did you hear about the Ultimate Warrior? Is he really dead?" And I was like, "Oh, what the hell?" I mean, come on, here we go again. And so first thing I do a Google search, and nothing popped up in news. And then I went to WWE.com, and it was plastered on the main page. It's like, wow, okay, well, sometimes accounts get hacked and whatever else, but I was like, man, it's amazing. I mean, it just, I only worked with him. I think it was once. It was real brief, and we didn't get to talk. I mean, if anything, maybe we shook hands, but yeah, it's like, wow. I mean, the last, New Orleans, he was one of the headliners. He was, it was Hogan, it was War, I mean, it was WrestleMania 30, and they built it around WrestleMania's biggest stars. And watching Raw, I didn't notice it quite so much at the Hall of Fame, but watching Raw when he walked down to the ring, and the Ultimate Warrior had a hard time shaking the top ring rope. It seemed like it was work for him. I was like, wow, that's odd, because he looked to be in really good shape. And I mean, who knows what he's been battling? I mean, he's always been a very private individual. But it's just, yeah, you just can't believe that, a couple days earlier he was being celebrated by all of his, peers and fans and whatnot. And now today we're talking about him passing on.
Yeah, it's almost not really sank in. You talk about celebrating his career, celebrating his life. I'm not sure, at least for me, that it's really sank in that just 24 hours, less than 24 hours after appearing on Raw, he's no longer with us. I mean, it's amazing, and you know, you look at that and you wonder. It makes it so clear that, as Jim Ross said in an interview earlier today, I was listening to, that your tomorrow's not guaranteed. As a matter of fact, an hour from now is not guaranteed, and it really just puts things in perspective. And the story that's been told, and I mean, no one's written this story, but no one's hoped for this story, but you really got to look at the story that's been told. A man gone from WWE for nearly 20 years. A man who has had a tumultuous relationship with WWE. A man who had a DVD produced about him by WWE that basically said he was one of the worst people in the world. He comes back, he gets that Hall of Fame induction. He speaks of that DVD. He speaks of his perception. He speaks of his reputation. And he does so in a very articulate fashion, and he redeems himself. He redeems himself on the WWE's stage to the WWE Universe. He does this on Saturday, a special moment regardless of what would happen some few days later. He does this on the Hall of Fame. He has his moment, if you will. He has his redemption moment. And then going into WrestleMania. And I think WrestleMania, what was it, 12 was the last one he was on back in Anaheim. Um,
It was against Triple H.
yeah, going into WrestleMania in front of 75,000 people in the Superdome. He's the headliner. He said it on Saturday night at the Hall of Fame. He's the headliner of the Hall of Fame. And to stand on that
Mm-hmm.
stage and be able to bow what would be one last time to those fans, just simply, it's picture perfect almost, David.
The
And
Ultimate Warrior went out the way any one of us would want to go. Celebration of his career. His loved ones are there, his family, his friends. Get to bury hatchets. You get to move on and go forward. And, the real tragedy is his two little girls. I'm sure that they will be taken care of because Warrior's always been smart with his money. That's why he's been in exile for 18 years, because he didn't need it.
mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, he went out like the Ultimate Warrior would, just 100 miles an hour, and boy, just the timing, everything is just so crazy. But going back to his Hall of Fame speech, I mean, we were at the Hall of Fame Saturday night. Um, we watched most of it. I mean, part of it was rather boring for us, and Al Snow was there with us as well, and even Al said that was the best Hall of Fame speech he's heard, because it was honest and real. And it was, if you get the chance, go back, watch the Hall of Fame, and just listen to the words that the Ultimate Warrior said in his speech. Um, it was great. And unfortunately, he's no longer with us. His legacy will now be brighter and stronger than ever because of this past weekend.
You know, it's you think back to surprise or celebrity deaths, if you will. And I don't know if you watched Deadliest Catch, but when Captain Phil died, that
Mhm.
this he had written down on a piece of paper, or he leaned over and said to someone just moments before he passed, you know, what's the ending? This is the ending. And as you talk about wanting to go out like any of us would want to go out, the Ultimate Warrior had that ending
Mhm.
this past week. I mean, it's almost too perfect, and to have been called home, if you will, on Tuesday once he arrived home from New Orleans after an amazing weekend. You got to imagine that he was a man at peace. You got to imagine that he was a man who had accomplished nearly all he wanted to do in life, short of seeing his two young daughters grow up.
Hmm.
And just to, let's look at those words and think of those words he said on Raw. And we started with it, but I want to read the real key part of that to you right now, which is, and I quote: "Every man's heart one day beats its final beat. His lungs breathe their final breath, and if what that man did in his life makes the blood pulse through the body of others and makes them bleed deeper in something that's larger than life, then his essence, his spirit, will be immortalized by the storytellers." He said
Hmm.
this on Monday. It's almost as if, and you talk about, you know, feelings and
People
emotions
know.
or whatnot,
People
but
know.
and it almost seems like he did know.
Hmm.
And people have talked about his bizarre promos and his bizarre speeches. Let's not lose sight of the fact that he was a motivational speaker for a number of years as well. And this is much more than motivational speak. It feels to me as if when he was talking about everything he said on Raw, it was about him, about himself. He was saying that he's ready.
Right. He was ready to go. Because if you think about it, at that Hall of Fame, he was there with Kevin Nash, Jake Roberts, Hulk Hogan, and Vince McMahon. People that he's had a rough relationship with.
Yeah.
And he buried the hatchet with all of them. You know,
Yeah.
he goes out, tells his story to the world at the Hall of Fame, then gets the opportunity to go back to WrestleMania after 18 years,
Mhm.
and then says goodbye to the fans on Raw that couldn't make it to New Orleans.
Timing's everything. And we have the privilege of knowing some things that we're not necessarily going to talk about on air, but in that regard, this Hall of Fame class was very special for very many reasons. And let's just be honest, Scott Hall and Jake Roberts obviously have gone through some troubled times in their life, and they're in a good place now. This was the
Hmm.
right time for them to go into the Hall of Fame. That wasn't the case with the Ultimate Warrior. That wasn't. There was no reasoning behind his induction aside from the fact that he deserved it, and that time was now. They could have done it next year. They could have done it last year, but who knew that that induction would be the most poignant and the most meaningful and the most significant one over the course of this past weekend?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just, I mean, social media has been blowing up: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, um, people posting pictures, people posting icons, people posting experiences. I mean, this guy, I mean, his career may not have been as long and as lengthy as, let's say, Hulk Hogan or the Macho Man. But when he was on top, when he was a draw, he was a star. I mean, that music blaring, his high intensity. I mean, I remember watching Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior, and I was torn because I was a Hulk Hogan guy. But it's like, wow, look at the Ultimate Warrior. The guy is amazing. And one of my favorite matches of all time because of just the story that they told. It was fantastic.
And that really, truly, for me at least, David, is the match that defines my childhood as a wrestling fan. Hogan Andre got me hooked, 1987.
Hmm.
Warrior Hogan made me a super fan at WrestleMania 6 in 1990, I believe it was. That
Right.
was the match that, as you said, you were torn. This was the biggest star in wrestling, Hulk Hogan, versus the second biggest star in wrestling, the Ultimate Warrior. And you didn't know who was going to win that matchup. And you talk about torches and passing the torch. If Hulk Hogan had not lost that match and passed the torch to the Ultimate Warrior, he may not have been as big a star in the history books as he is. And I'm not
Hmm.
faulting the Warrior at all. I'm simply saying that that's why those moments in wrestling mean so much, because as we all watch as fans and as one big wrestling family, it's those moments that define a person, they define a character, and it was that moment that did it for me. The Ultimate Warrior became that day. The Ultimate Warrior was made, if you will, that day. And, if you go back to that Hall of Fame speech, we'll talk more about his memorable matchups in a minute, but if you go back to that Hall of Fame speech, I think what we all got a chance to learn was we'd all been exposed to the warrior or the character, and there had been jokes about his promos and the fact that he's quote unquote insane, which by the way was a complete work, and he worked everybody perfectly on it. But we learned about the man, Jim Hellwig, warrior, which we'd never done. We never had heard about his wife. We'd never heard
Hmm.
about his children. We had never seen anything but the character warrior. And this past Saturday night, he, Warrior, introduced us to him, the man, Warrior Hellwig. And again, just so amazingly profound that this would happen 3 days before his death, where we would finally get to know this person who we have immortalized as a tremendous star in the business of professional wrestling. It's so amazing to me. I can't even comprehend just how meaningful every moment that the Ultimate Warrior was involved in this weekend would ultimately end up being.
And it's going to keep going because this isn't just going to fade away in a day or two. This is going to go on for the next couple weeks, if not another month. The network is already having a show for him tonight at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
a tribute show. You know, there's going to be a lot more merchandise coming out now. There's going to be so much Ultimate Warrior merchandise and autographs and everything being available. Um, and you know what? They're going to make his legacy, like I said, that much bigger and stronger and brighter. I mean, he was a star. He was the guy that Hogan, he fought Hogan, he fought Savage, and then he teamed with the Road Warriors against Demolition. And let's not forget going to the NWO with the One Warrior Nation against them. I mean, the guy has always been in a top spot, and he's always been, a draw and a guy that sold merchandise and tickets. And wow, he's definitely going to be missed because he's influenced so many people along the way.
Yeah. Talk about that influence, and you talked about WrestleMania 6, which was just an amazing, amazing event. But what about that SummerSlam match with Honky Tonk Man, where he won the Intercontinental Championship in record time, and just came in and really just blew through all of WWE with that win of a title that was tremendously significant at the time. That
Hmm.
really was the arrival of the Ultimate Warrior.
Yeah, I mean, when he went down to SummerSlam, I think that was SummerSlam 1990, the very first one, and was it like 30 some seconds defeats the Honky Tonk
Yeah,
Man,
I think
who
it
at
might
the
have been
time was
88.
still,
Yeah.
oh yeah, it was 88, who was at that time the longest reigning IC champ of all time.
Hmm.
To just go down there and take care of business like that, and then to go on and have such a great run and matches with Ravishing Rick Rude and Jake the Snake Roberts and Undertaker, and he fought them all. Andre the Giant. Now, of course, Andre never cared much for him, and at that time he was the young punk kid, and Andre wanted to teach him a lesson. But boy, I tell you, I mean, the Ultimate Warrior, he was in the ring with all the top guys.
Yeah. Macho Man Randy Savage at WrestleMania 7. Remember the big reuniting between he and Elizabeth? Macho Man
Hmm.
and Elizabeth. Ultimate Warrior part of that big matchup. This coming off the heels of just last year, WrestleMania 6 being in that main event with Hulk Hogan. Didn't know at the time, but that would be one of Ultimate Warrior's final matchups. He would leave by SummerSlam of that year, only to make one of the grandest returns in the history of professional wrestling in the Hoosier Dome, WrestleMania 8, coming down to save Hulk Hogan and making his return to WWE in 1992. That was so cool because it was one of the rare moments, or one of the final moments, that we got true shock and surprise in professional wrestling. I remember watching with my family at my aunt's house, and Papa Shango and Sid are beating up on Hogan, and then the music hits. Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon on commentary. Heenan goes crazy. They're shocked. It's the Ultimate Warrior. He comes running 900 miles an hour down that aisle, hits that corner, turns, never stops a beat, and the intensity that this man exhibited from the moment he hit the curtain to the moment the match ended was just amazing. And it was paced in such a way that you believed his intensity in the ring. He was ready to come down and battle and fight, and he was a warrior. I'm not really sure. You know, we learned from Al Snow a couple of weeks ago when he was on the Pro Wrestling Report Primetime about A, B, and C. From the moment you enter the ring, from the moment you enter the arena, to the moment you enter the ring, to the moment you leave the arena, being that character. Ultimate
Hmm.
Warrior did that probably better than anyone else. I would say maybe the Undertaker's in that category as well, but that's a damn good category to be in. Ultimate Warrior was just fantastic in that role, and no one since or before him has come close to that level of intensity that he exhibited.
No, I mean John Cena is pretty close, running down to the ring and going 100 miles an hour, but the Ultimate Warrior, I mean, they broke the mold on him because no one else could ever duplicate what he does.
So many matchups, and also the return to WWE. When Ultimate Warrior was announced as going into the Hall of Fame a couple of weeks ago, David Hero, a couple of months ago at this point, what was your initial reaction?
Couldn't believe it. Like, wow, they worked out a hell of a payday to get him there. I mean, there was obviously a whole lot of concessions because, there was a lot of heat, there was a lot of hatred, there was a lot of mistrust. I mean, they battled in court,
Yeah, he
and
sued them to get the rights to his name, then
yeah,
ultimately legally changed his name to Warrior. He sued them multiple times, actually. You've seen, we talked about the letters that have gone back and forth, but
yes,
that's another good point, too, is Linda McMahon doing that induction, I found to be bizarre. However, it was so telling when she said that she was his primary contact within WWE and that
hmm
he treated her like, and even at one point called her mom.
hmm yeah. I've always heard good things about Linda, and you could definitely tell that they had a strong relationship. I mean, obviously Warrior got what he wanted. There were certain things that he requested, and WWE pretty much came through on everything for them because they know how important it is to get the Ultimate Warrior into the Hall of Fame.
Well,
Now they got to get the Macho Man in there.
it's also a sign of respect. It's a show of respect from WWE to the talent. Yes, there is money involved, and yes, there are paydays, but at the same
Mhm.
time, this is the ultimate show of respect from WWE to the talent. We would like to induct you into our Hall of Fame. It means a lot, especially when
Mhm.
you're in that moment and you're receiving that induction, and you're doing so alone on a stage in front of 10,000 people talking about you, your career, your
Right.
life, and your legacy. It doesn't get any better than that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just weird that we're sitting here talking about the guy right now, like this.
Yeah.
Somber, relaxed, you know?
hmm Well, let's talk about some of the comments. You talked about Twitter blowing up or whatnot, and there were several people. You talked about also burying the hatchet. Kevin Nash spoke of that. Hulk Hogan spoke of that. The Iron Sheik even posted a video thanking the Warrior and talking about how much of a state of disbelief he's in. This, you've got Andre the Giant, you've got Macho Man Randy Savage. I think that as you talk about wrestling deaths, the Ultimate Warrior, not that you want to rank them or anything, but it's as significant as those two. As significant as Andre the Giant passing away, as significant as Macho Man passing away, I think the Ultimate Warrior is right in that top echelon of shocking wrestling deaths. Not because of how or why it happened, but just
Hmm.
the impact that they had on the business, the impact that they had on our generation of fans, and then the sudden loss of their life.
Oh, absolutely agreed. And Warrior and Savage were just out of nowhere. I mean, Savage was a car accident, and everyone just saw Warrior. But they're two pop culture icons.
hmm
People know. I mean, Daniel Tosh did a skit dressed up as the Ultimate Warrior.
Absolutely. And
You
and
know, so,
and how
so
many
there's
of
that
us
crossover appeal.
how many of us didn't at one point put some tassels around our arms or put a robe on and run up and down the halls of the house
No,
and
I
try
never
to
did that.
emulate the Ultimate Warrior? But you talk about that mainstream coverage as well.
Mhm.
Here's what I find good about this story. While he was only 54 years old, CNN did a report on it early this morning. Yahoo Sports did a report. Obviously, ESPN covering this as well. The one thing missing from this death, there's no speculation. There's
Right.
no assumption that this was a drug problem or related to anything other than a sudden death of some reason. And I, for one, I want to give my respect and my thanks to all the news organizations that did not take that track because they have all the reason in the world to because of what the wrestling business has given them in the
Well,
past.
they will say that it was the years of steroid abuse. That's gonna it'll come up absolutely in the autopsy.
Perhaps it will. I'm not sure it does at this point because it didn't at first, and that's the difference this time. And the point that I like to make is usually that's one of the first things you hear about in these stories about a wrestler passing away. It hasn't been touched once in this story about the Ultimate Warrior, and I think it goes back to your point about the cultural significance that he as a character had. When, and obviously we all go at some time, but when Hulk Hogan passes, I think it's going to be as respectful, and that's what it really was, is respect for the Ultimate Warrior. Let's think back now, when Eddie Guerrero passed, when Chris Benoit passed, people started talking about drugs, steroids, abuse. Now, Benoit was a whole different story, obviously, and some of those things did ultimately end up being contributors, but in this case, that dialogue is completely absent, and I think that really is a respect out of respect for the Ultimate Warrior.
Well, but here's also why. I mean, Eddie Guerrero was in and out of rehab as well.
Yeah,
Ultimate Warrior, as far as anyone knows, has never been in drug and alcohol rehab. So there's there's no paper trail.
quite frankly, as far as everyone knows, he's never taken a drug in his life. As far as everyone knows, he's never. So that is indeed a valid point as to why that speculation may not be there. But
Mhm.
so many comments, including on our Facebook page, facebook.com/PWR show. First one comes from Andrew James, who says, Hall of Fame Saturday, WrestleMania appearance Sunday, Raw appearance Monday, Dead Tuesday. I'm in shock. Serrano Williams saying, hopefully he was able to make peace with everybody that he had issues with. R.I.P. Warrior. And to that point, in his Hall of Fame speech, he said he never really had an issue with anyone. He said he gave respect to the people who deserved respect,
Mhm.
but he was a bit of a loner, I guess you could say. He sort of did his own thing, which probably led to some of the animosity that some people had about him.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. He was there. He was there to do business. He wasn't about to get involved with all the politics and nothing else.
Yeah. Um, and finally, Joe Dufek says, I'm glad he was able to receive the Hall of Fame induction, an appearance on Raw, and time with fans during his final days. I found it awesome on Monday that Ultimate Warrior was going to be appearing on Raw. I thought there would be some kind of angle or there'd
Hmm.
be some reason for it, and I didn't find it odd, but I found it interesting that all he did was come out and give that what would be a very telling speech. Now that I look back at it, gosh, you talk about divine intervention, and you talk about sixth sense, I guess you can call it. Man, this just it, it, it it's a perfect story.
Yes.
Not that there's
And
anything good about his death,
no,
but this is an
Hollywood couldn't
honorable.
have done a better script.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
Hmm.
It's just amazing, and listening to those words and watching that speech again, and there are people saying, and TMZ is reporting that he appeared weak all weekend. You talked about the issue with the ropes earlier. If you even go back to years from before now, Ultimate Warrior's had difficulty walking. He's been he's obviously smaller. He's obviously older. He obviously put his body through a lot in the time he was in wrestling. So none of that is really shocking or surprising, but when you start doing the math in a backwards fashion, you start seeing these things as telling things or tells, if you will. Maybe, just maybe, someone in WWE realized that something was off. Maybe Warrior himself realized that something was off, and that's why we had that segment on Raw on Monday night. Now,
Hmm.
the reason is unimportant, but it was peculiar that segment occurred on Raw this past Monday night.
Well, they have 3 hours of TV to fill. Maybe he asked for it. Maybe he says, "I want to go back to Raw one more time."
Yeah. Yep. It's a good point. Well, I'm not sure what more we could say here in this forum today, as obviously we're still in a state of shock, and still grieving as everyone else is, but we can't do this without giving our condolences to his wife Dana and his two young daughters who escorted him to the podium on Saturday at the Hall of Fame. They obviously are going through a tremendous loss, and you talk about death, you talk about everyone meeting their maker, and it's these sudden ones when there is that massive, medical situation or what have you that are the worst ones to take because he wasn't sick, no one was expecting this or planning for it. It's a sudden loss. And I hope that the family is allowed time to grieve. I hope that they're allowed time to celebrate the life of the Ultimate Warrior, or the man they knew as Jim Hellwig. And really, just a devastating loss for that family, his family, and the wrestling family all over the world as well. Just fantastic.
Hmm.
So with that, folks, I can't think of a better way to end the podcast here, David Hero, than with the ever so familiar theme that is that of the Ultimate Warrior. Rest in peace, Warrior. Thank you for all that you gave us as wrestling fans. And at some point, we'll all see you at the big wrestling ring in the sky. For David Hero, this is Damian Nelson saying thank you so much for joining us in this very special Ultimate Warrior tribute show.